to go. So my name is Carrie Lee. I work as the Assistant Director for the Career Planning Development Center, and I work with students in School of Business and Technology, School of Education, and students who are undeclared. So John Holstein, my colleague, is on the call today as well. And so he works with students in the Lee Jardine School of Fine Arts, College of Arts and Sciences, and School of Communications. So the format for the virtual coffee talk today is pretty informal. We wanted to give you all an opportunity to chat and check in with us as you're graduating, kind of thinking about that next step in your career, whatever that might be. So we have just kind of some broad questions to start us off, maybe talk about a few resources that are out there. So we'll kind of do that. And then the rest of the time is really open for questions from you. So anything career related is totally fair game. So feel free to drop those in the chat. And then we can just kind of address those questions as they come in. Or if you want to, unmute yourself and talk through too, that's fine as well. So we can go ahead and kind of get started with some questions. But like I said, we want this to be a conversation, answer any questions that you might have. So, while we're talking, just remember to keep your mic on mute so we don't get any feedback. So, John, we can kind of both take turns answering things.
Sure.
But I just wanted to ask, what's the typical timeline for a job search for a new grad?
Yeah, no, that's a very important thing to consider. And I think the answer kind of somewhat depends on what the goals are and what you're looking for. I like to budget at least about 3 to 6 months, really, from kind of start to finish in terms of kind of making sure that you have more than enough time from that first stage of kind of like researching different employers and exploring different opportunities that might be out there to, developing your application materials, to then going through the application process and then following up and reaching out as needed to employers, and then the interviewing stage, and then typically the decision-making stage after that, when ideally you have a few different options. So yeah, I'd like to budget between 3 to 6 months, again, depending on what it is you're looking to do, what industry you're in, what role you're seeking. And so, the sooner you can get started in that process, and the more kind of buffer room you have in terms of time, the better off you're going to be. So I like to start as soon as possible, at least with that research stage, and looking at what options may entail, identifying employers that you might want to reach out to and might want to kind of target with your job search. But yeah, generally I would say the 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And something that I think is really important, as you said, is definitely that kind of planning ahead, kind of figuring out what your goals are, really creating an intentional job search. And something that I always like to mention to students and grads as well is thinking about kind of the timeline from an employer perspective, because once they know that they have a job opening that gets approved, they're ready to post that job opportunity online. A lot of times those job postings are up for 2 weeks. They might be up for a month. They might be up for shorter than that. If it's a very competitive posting, they get a lot of applicants and feel like they don't need to leave it open any longer. But 2 weeks is kind of a general rule there. And then after that job posting is closed, typically they're going to go through the applications, decide, who do we want to offer an interview. So that will take a little bit of time, and then reach out to folks, schedule that interview. Typically, a lot of kind of professional jobs will do 2 stages of interviews. So they may do like a phone or a Zoom interview first, and then in person, or these days it may be another Zoom interview. Um, and so each step of that process where they're kind of narrowing down candidates can, easily take a week, 2 weeks, could be longer than that. So by the time that somebody has contacted you, you've gone through 2 rounds of interviews, they said, yes, you're great, we want you to start, and they offer you the job, that process can easily take 2 months from when you applied to a job to getting a job offer. And some companies are just busier, it takes a little bit longer. Or some areas like government, it just tends to be a little bit more involved process. So, that's just something to keep in mind from your perspective as well. Because I know sometimes folks get really concerned where they're like, well, I applied for this job a week ago. I haven't heard anything. Does that mean I didn't get the job or not? And sometimes it is just, it hasn't been long enough for them to go through everything yet.
Yeah, no, those are great points. I think also thinking about the industry, certain industries have different time periods where job opportunities might be a lot more prevalent. So like I know with education, like elementary and high school education, mid-March and then again late in summer are typically some of those times where you would expect more job opportunities to be posted. So not every industry has those certain time frames where they're where you can expect those job opportunities to be listed, but some do. So that's definitely another consideration to take into account as well.
Great. Yeah, and if you all have questions, like I said, feel free to type those in the chat and we can address those as they come up. And until then, we can chat some more things too. So I know, unfortunately, this last year or so has been not what everyone's planned on. So where you might have thought about, getting an internship last summer, getting some more experience that just didn't work out due to COVID and less opportunities out there. So if you're kind of in that boat where you feel like you may not have been able to get as much experience as you wanted, what are some ways that you can still stand out, or what kinds of things should you emphasize on your applications?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Carrie. And I think a lot of kind of plans or ideas kind of had to take a little detour over the past year, but there are definitely some things that you can highlight through your application materials or certain experiences that you might have had that you can kind of showcase. And then additionally, maybe you have, or maybe you're planning on using some time to kind of expand your network as well. That's something that I've seen a lot of students doing throughout the past year, and kind of having this extra time or having the inability to gather in person has led to a lot of more virtual networking or getting in touch with other people that way. But as far as through application materials, I think, really focusing on academic projects that you've completed that are highly relevant to your goal. Maybe you've engaged in some experiential learning opportunities like internships, or maybe there have been community or volunteer experiences that you've been engaged with that would be meaningful, would potentially be beneficial for an employer to know about. So those are some certain areas that you could really look at. Maybe you've developed some different technical skills throughout this past year or even beyond. And that would be something to highlight through your application materials as well. So it really kind of depends on what you've been up to. I think really sitting down and brainstorming and thinking like, okay, so what have been some of the bigger things I've worked on? What have been some time-consuming projects I've worked on in the past year? And that's going to give you some indication of what you might want to talk about with employers, or certain experiences that might be highly relevant that you could use to demonstrate different skills, whether they be technical skills or transferable soft skills as well. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, is that, for employers, they want to find candidates who have, the right knowledge, the right skill sets where they can step into positions, but they don't necessarily care as much about how you develop those skills, whether it was through a job or an internship or coursework projects, personal projects, in your own time. So we do have a question from the group. So how can I find events to expand my network, that's my biggest struggle, is just finding the right place to go for those.
Yeah, and there are a few different ways that you can approach this. So expanding your network can be, you know, a few resources that can be helpful would be looking at professional organizations and associations that are aligned with the industry or what you're looking to do post graduation. So I know, like with Carrie and myself, we're both a member of many, and actually serve on the Missouri Career Development Association. So we're involved with a lot of different career development related professional organizations, which also have a lot of newsletters and a lot of times job openings listed on the websites as well. So that's a great way to learn about different opportunities, but it's also a great way to get connected to other folks in that industry. So by attending, conferences, which, at least this past year, a lot of them have been mostly virtual. So I think we've both attended a number of different virtual conferences where we've been able to interact with other people. And there have been specific instances of like breakout rooms where you're able to actually have networking opportunities with people in your industry. So I definitely look at professional organizations that are involved with your specific field of interest. And then also, clubs and organizations here on campus or sponsored through the university would be a good way to do that as well. I also am a huge advocate for something called informational interviewing. And I don't know, Carrie, do you want to talk a little bit about informational interviewing and how students can kind of harness that power?
Yeah, absolutely. So informational interviews are really just conversation with professionals. So this is a really good strategy to get connected with folks. Because if you're kind of coming at it from an informational perspective, you might be looking on LinkedIn to say, okay, I really want to get into marketing. What's it like being a market analyst? So reaching out to somebody to say, I'm Carrie, I'm graduating with a degree in marketing from Webster. I'm really interested in your career path. Would you have some time to talk with me about your career advice you might have for somebody starting out and wanting to get into these sorts of roles? Because people are pretty happy to talk about themselves. And so that can really give you good information on, what's it like doing that work every day? What professional organizations have they found really helpful in their work? What sorts of things might be good to focus on in your applications? So yeah, that is something that I would always suggest, as you're kind of looking for any new opportunity, because it's just going to give you really the most detailed information, because that's somebody who's in that job every day. And then kind of going off that too, there are Webster alumni chapters. So whether you're here in the St. Louis area or elsewhere in the world, that's another great way to get connected with folks. And then there are events just on kind of general platforms. So things like Meetup or Eventbrite. So, those have things like, I know there's a cybersecurity group here in St. Louis that's just like an informal organization that meets regularly, or the Venture Cafe is focused on folks who are interested in entrepreneurship in the St. Louis area. So those Meetup, Eventbrite, and then Handshake as well. So employers can host events and invite students from Webster or other institutions. So that's somewhere else to check. So we do have some other questions. So what should we include when reaching out for cold call, messaging on LinkedIn, and also kind of including in follow-up emails? So if you were like following up an application.
Yeah, and those are very important questions because it doesn't necessarily come naturally to everyone to reach out to more or less a perfect stranger and to have that kind of introduction prepared. So what you can do ahead of time is create what's called like an elevator pitch or a networking pitch or some sort of adapted introduction where you introduce sort of who you are as a professional, where you are kind of academically. So you would probably say you're a student at Webster University studying XYZ, interested in learning more about ABC. And in the case of informational interviewing, you would indicate how you kind of located that individual, what information about their profile or about them as a professional made you want to kind of seek out their their insight. And so providing that kind of context as to who you are and why you're getting in touch initially can be quite useful for them kind of knowing what exactly to expect about kind of the events that will transpire, whether that's reaching out for an informational interview or whatever it may be. And then certainly, the question mentioned following up, definitely thanking the person for their time and for providing the opportunity to connect is definitely something you want to do. It doesn't necessarily have to be a super lengthy email or note or anything like that. Just a simple thank you, maybe highlighting some different elements about what you talked about or things that stood out to you that you found really important about that conversation can really go a long way. And that can be a good way to just it's a professional courtesy for them taking that time out of their day to talk with you. So yeah, great question, and it's definitely very important to thank them and express gratitude for their time, and to also have that kind of professional introduction somewhat prepared ahead of time. I didn't mention this before, but it's good to have an idea of what you want to talk about, and not necessarily memorized or rehearsed, but sort of an idea of some bullet points that you might want to touch on when you do first introduce yourself. But yeah, Carrie, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think you hit on all of the key points there. If you're reaching out to someone in HR, so for instance, you're really interested in this opportunity, you've applied, you haven't heard anything, it's been a little bit since you've applied, or the job posting is closed. So in those cases, it's totally fine, like John said, to do something brief, but just to kind of reach out, reiterate your interest in the position, and just kind of ask where they're at in the timeline of the process, or if there's any other information, that they need from you. That's just kind of a general way to reach out. Or if you have a specific question, about the opportunity or something, that's obviously a good way to interact, because, sometimes you may not ever get a response. And, that's okay if you have followed up, you haven't heard from them, a week or two. I would generally kind of move on to the next one. So it doesn't mean that they won't, because like I said, sometimes companies are just slow, or whoever's like the deciding factor is out on vacation, or wrapping up from like a sick leave or something. So not to necessarily give up hope, but just make sure you're not putting all of your eggs in one basket, as it were.
I think
yeah.
I think I misunderstood the question at first and was responding to informational interviewing and reaching out to professional contacts. But yeah, certainly in the case of employers, it is really beneficial to reach out once you've submitted your application materials. I recommend about a week or so after, maybe like 5 days to a week, and just to check in. And sometimes just that simple act of checking in and seeing if there's anything else, any other information you can provide, sometimes that really shows your initiative and your dedication to or sincere interest in that position, and can sort of make your name stand out above some of the other candidates who maybe didn't take that opportunity to reach out. So that is definitely something I advocate for as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think they were asking kind of for both of those circumstances. Okay. So do you have any advice for getting started doing freelance work?
Yeah, no, that is something that comes up pretty often, especially with some of the work I do with School of Communication students who, a lot of it tends to be more creative or surrounding like film, television, animation, audio, those different areas. But definitely kind of first getting into doing some work and developing that professional credibility. I mean, a lot of times if you do say, a freelance job, or if you do even a volunteer piece of work, can sometimes snowball and have the snowball effect. And that person that you did that work for will then kind of recommend you to others. And and it will kind of grow from there. So I think first getting started with that initial foray into freelance work can be difficult, but I think, again, looking at, well, identifying a need and finding different organizations or different people who might want that work, offering your services, and then also being able to showcase what you've done before through your professional portfolio is helpful as well. So a lot of times you can let your work speak for itself, or at least provide the potential client with an idea of what it is that you've done, and the high quality work that you have produced. And so that can kind of help give them an idea of what to expect if they were to hire you, or if they were to give you that opportunity to create something. But yeah, I think a lot of times, at least initially, finding those opportunities, whether they're super well compensated or whether they're volunteer opportunities, can sometimes just having that first work sample to show, or that first element that you can point to show the high quality work that you can create, it's really helpful for expanding that even further.
Yeah, and there are certainly opportunities that are kind of like freelance contract work that are posted on those regular forums like LinkedIn, Indeed. Um, but there are sites really dedicated to that as well. So like I know Upwork is one that has come up in the past, but there's certainly tons of others out there as well where folks are really explicitly working for those short-term projects that, maybe they're a small company and so they don't have a graphic designer on retainer, but they want somebody to kind of work on some projects. So what kind of assistance or tools are available for recent graduates to prepare for possible interviews? Are there any mock interviews that we can schedule to improve our interviewing skills?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. And in fact, graduates have up to a year post-graduation to meet individually with their career advisor. And we can certainly create mock interview questions that you might be expected to answer within a real interview setting. And that's a great way to kind of do a dry run, iron out any details that might need to be addressed, and to get more experience and practice, so that by the time you are in a real interview setting, you've already kind of answered questions similar to this, or already have a feel for what to expect and kind of how you might want to approach crafting effective responses. So yeah, we can definitely work with you, and if you reach out to your career advisor and schedule an appointment and just let them know ahead of time sort of what industry or what job you might be looking for, they can craft some questions that you might be expected to answer, and can really get that opportunity to practice. And ultimately, the more you practice, the more confident you're going to feel for the real thing. So that is something we recommend. We also have a new resource, which, Carrie, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, but yeah.
Yeah, so absolutely. Like John said, you can always schedule that one-on-one time with us to talk through some questions. And then we also have something called My Interview Practice. So I put that link in the chat. So you can make an account with your Webster email. And so what that is it's a way where you can practice virtual interviewing. So you can select what industry, like what type of job you're interested in and how long you want that practice interview to be. And then it will ask you questions. So you can record yourself answering those. And you can just do that for your own practice. If you just want to kind of see, like, what do I look like when I'm answering my questions? Am I waving my hands around the whole time? Something like that, where you can kind of evaluate yourself. And then if you want to, you can also send it to your career advisor. So if you maybe have a really hard time making an appointment, if you're like working full time and going to school or something, that's another great resource where you can get feedback as well that way. So our next question, can you get a job after several phone interviews, or are they just introductory?
Yeah, for a lot of positions, I think you mentioned this before, Carrie, but a lot of times there will be multiple interviews. So a lot of times there will be that first introductory interview, which will, I guess, oftentimes takes place over the phone. That's not always the case, but a lot of times it moves from a phone interview to then either in person or a like a Zoom or virtual interview too. So a lot of times that first one will be a phone interview, and that's sort of a way for them to, you know, start with a larger list and then kind of pare down to more specific candidates that they want to follow up with. And then some of those follow-up interviews, the questions may be a little bit different too. They may be a little bit more specific. They may be more tailored to the specific position or the expectations of that role. Um, I've gone on second interviews where I was actually asked some of the same questions as the first one too, which is a little bit, you'd think, well, why are they doing that? But it actually comes in handy to think about, how would I answer that again if given the opportunity? Sometimes you get that opportunity and they do ask you the same question. And sometimes they're looking at did those answers evolve? Did they change at all? So yeah, I hope that kind of answers that question. But Carrie, yeah, is there any more you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, and sometimes it's about different folks being on that call. So if they have like a longer interview process where you're like, I've already done this once, like I don't necessarily want to do 2 or 3 interviews for a position. But sometimes that is really like that kind of first level, as John said, it's very much screening. So kind of assessing like, okay, do you actually really have the skills we're looking for? Do we feel like you could step into this position? And so that might just be with like someone from HR, or the main supervisor. And then those other interviews may include other folks. So it might be like somebody who'd be in the same role as you, or like a colleague in your department, your potential supervisor, like their supervisor. So depending on like the level of position, that's often part of it too, where you may feel like I am kind of re-answering those same things, but there are some different people on that call every time. So, you know, everywhere has a little bit different practice, but yeah, if they're asking you back and they keep asking you, that's clearly a good sign that you're doing some things right. So yes, I think that hopefully helped you out a little bit. So another question that came into the chat. So any advice on feeling like you're constantly underqualified as you're getting job rejections?
Yes, and this is actually, I'm so glad that this question came up, because a lot of times students will, or everyone will, feel as though they must meet all of those qualifications that are listed. They must check all of those boxes, and otherwise there's no point in applying. That is not necessarily the case. You can kind of think about what the employer, like the employer qualifications, in terms of their wish list. So their ideal candidate has X amount of years of experience and has, this type of experience or these specific skills. That's not to say that they're going to get candidates who match that. A lot of times they don't. And what also is important to keep in mind is you have some latitude in how you want to describe your experience and how you want to frame it. Maybe you don't necessarily have all of those years of experience, but maybe you have experience in other areas that's pretty relatable and aligned with what is expected of that role. So unless there's some giant glaring, like you don't have a certification that's absolutely required for that, I would go ahead and apply. And there's actually been a lot of research done on, some of those, job applicants or job seekers who don't end up applying to positions that are they're actually quite qualified for. So I would go ahead and take that opportunity to submit the application and to do whatever you can to connect the dots between your experience and your skills and those of the skills and experiences that the employer is specifically noting as being of interest. Even though you're not 100% qualified, if there's a compelling case to be made that you do have experience and that you would succeed in that role, go ahead and apply.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because, that's something that most of us feel, or certainly, when I was looking for my first job, it is hard because you don't really know what candidate pools are like. You know what you've done and what experience you have. But, the other side to that, I would say, is thinking about like, what can you control? So, you can control like how are you talking about your experience? Like John said, you know, your resume, your cover letter, how you're presenting yourself in an interview. Those are things that you have control over. You don't have control over who else is in that applicant pool and like what is in that random recruiter's brain as they're going through applications, right? So this has been just a really hard time for everybody. You know, hiring is definitely picking up compared to last spring, last summer. That was really like the low point for a lot of employers. And so things are continually getting better. There are lots of opportunities that are out there, but you know, this has just been a challenging time to job search for everyone. So don't feel like this is a reflection on you or your experience just as much as this is a strange time to be in the world. And, you know, the first job is always the hardest. Like once you have a job, it's so much easier to get that next one because you have this very clear way to demonstrate like, yeah, I'm already my skills. I don't have a lot of sense of urgency here. But that first one is often going to take the longest and be the hardest.
That's a really good point. And something I also want to emphasize is, you know, it's different for everybody. Some, you may find that you graduate and you just kind of slide right into that new job as no big deal. That's not the case for everyone, but try not to get too down on yourself if it does seem like, you know, you're not getting much traction. There, again, kind of like Carrie said, focus on what you can control. If there's more to do, maybe kind of retool, look at taking a different approach. But I think a lot of times it can be frustrating if you're putting out a really concerted effort, but you're not seeing much as a result. Give it some time. I think for a lot of people, it comes a little bit later, and I think if you stick with it, you will be successful. But it's sometimes a challenge if you're not seeing those immediate results. So try to be patient. Be patient with yourself and really give yourself some time, but you know, keep working at it and keep applying to different positions and doing what you can control to be successful.
Yeah, and you know, we're here as a resource, like John said. So you know, we will do one-on-one appointments for up to a year after graduation. And then after that part, it's just kind of our scale of being a couple of people to how many thousands and thousands of alumni we have. But resources like Handshake, you know, events and webinars like this one that we're hosting, all of our online resources, those are always accessible to you as an alumni. So, you know, if you are feeling a little bit stuck, running into some challenges, you know, reach out. I put the link for how to make an appointment with us in the chat, but definitely do that and just get feedback from other folks too, you know, whether that's having somebody else look over your application materials, or if you have like a mentor, a faculty member, you know, a supervisor that you're close to, getting their thoughts too, because sometimes it's hard if you're just kind of in your own head thinking about things, that external source might be able to say like, oh, well, you know, maybe you could emphasize this a little bit more, or maybe there's some other things here that you could focus on too. So those are all the questions that had come through the chat, but anything else that you all really wanted to make sure and address right now?
And again, feel free to either put it in the chat or unmute yourself or whatever you want to do.
And I will send an email to you all with those things I put in the chat. So if you haven't had a chance to click through everything, I'll send you that information as well to your Webster email. Okay, well, John, do you have any other last thoughts, last advice for our soon-to-be grads?
Yeah, no, I think kind of echoing what you mentioned a moment ago is reach out to others who may be able to help, whether that's faculty or former or current classmates or you know, anybody in your network. Sometimes just reaching out the right place, the right time, you might learn of different opportunities So it never hurts to reach out and connect with others and let them know about kind of your intention and what you're looking to do. Yeah, I would say, definitely continue to connect with people and do what you can personally, but also reach out and get assistance where you can as well. And if you do want to connect with a career advisor, I would definitely encourage you to do so. And it never hurts to discuss different possibilities and to get someone else to um, you know get someone else's insight about different strategies that you might want to employ. So yeah, I would say stick with it, do what you can, and really think about the different application materials and how they're expressing your skills and experiences and kind of what story they're telling a potential employer. Um, but yeah, I'm just excited for everyone to go out and get started or continue along that process.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, John, for all of your insight. And yes, I echo everything you just said. So yeah, we're here as a resource for you all, and all those things that John was talking about, and making sure that you're connecting with your network as well. Because I mean, even just for me personally, I found out about my current job because one of my supervisors from grad school knew I was looking and was like, "Oh, hey, Webster has a job posting. Like, you should check this out." So there really are those things that make that process easier. So you know, make sure you're putting in the time, putting in those applications, but use your network as well. So thank you all so much for contributing today, asking your questions in the chat. So we wish you much success and congratulations on graduating. And like I said, I will send a follow-up email to you all with resources that we mentioned today. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.